Some nights the world feels a little too loud. The notifications, the to-do lists, the feeling that you should always be doing more, making more, being more, it all seems to follow you right up to the edge of your bed. For a long time, I told myself I would draw when I had time, when I had a free afternoon, when my desk was clean, when I felt inspired. And somehow, that perfect moment almost never showed up. So I decided to try something different. Instead of waiting for the perfect day, I gave myself 30 imperfect nights. For the next 30 days, I made a promise. Every evening before bed, I would sit right here at my bedside desk, grab a tiny piece of paper, and spend 30 to 60 minutes drawing. Nothing huge, nothing epic, just tiny drawings, little portals into a strange, mossy, magical world that's always humming in the back of my mind. I didn't set out to fill giant pages or finished polished illustrations. I just wanted a ritual, a small, quiet moment to come back to myself at the end of the day, a way to say, I showed up for my art today, even if the drawing was only the size of a postage stamp. In this video, I'm going to take you through all 30 nights of this experiment. The sleepy ones where I could barely keep my eyes open but drew anyway. The restless ones where my mind wouldn't stop spinning and the page would become a place to put that energy. The unexpectedly magical ones where a tiny sketch turned into a character or a place I didn't know I was looking for. You'll see the drawings, of course, but more than that, I want to show you what it feels like to build a habit that lives in the quiet hours, in that in-between space, where the day is ending and the night hasn't quite begun. Some of these drawings are wobbly, some are rushed, some make me cringe a little, but together, they tell a story. Not just of creatures in foggy little forests, but of a person learning to show up for herself, one tiny square of paper at a time. So make yourself a cup of tea, dim the lights, and settle in. Let's begin on night 1 and see what happens when you invite a little bit of magic to visit you every night right before you fall asleep. So out of this whole 30-day challenge, I have to be completely honest, as even though the dopamine levels were high when I started this project, I felt really rigid the first week, and I was really like the perfectionist in me was just really trying to come out. And I did the first painting on, like, I sketched thumbnails and then I transferred it to my iPad and then I transferred it to paper and finished it, which was the key one that you just saw. And as much as I like that piece, I feel like I had started this challenge the wrong way, with too much pressure, too much camera, too much aesthetics, instead of just focusing on drawing every night, which was essentially the whole point of this challenge. And I also possibly may have not chosen the best medium to work at my bedside desk for this challenge, but I did choose watercolor. And even though I was showing up every night and painting for 30 minutes to an hour, there was a lot of dry time involved. So I would start working on other pieces while I was waiting for things to dry and whatnot, which was totally fine, by the way. Like, I mean, there's no right or wrong way to do this in my mind. I was still painting every night, and that was the whole point. But it just became, in my head, I was like, I need to finish a tiny painting every night. I need to have 30 of these by the end of this challenge. And that kind of wasn't really the whole point. The whole point was to just show up and draw every day. I didn't have to have a finished piece every day, but I needed to draw or paint every day. So, as unnecessarily pressure filled that first week was, I did produce some of my favorite pieces out of the entire month that first week with watercolor, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I had a really good time with my little travel watercolor paint set and my little paint desk and whatnot. And I actually would just put on one of my favorite shows or an audiobook and just kind of relax and paint every night before bed instead of scrolling on my phone, which was very eye-opening, to say the least. Before I started this challenge, I had found myself in a pattern of constant doom scrolling, and it just became quite, can't think of like the best word to describe it, but like every day I kind of felt like I was getting dumber. Like the more I scrolled, the dumber I felt, and I just like found myself like, why, like how many days out of my life am I going to give this phone, you know? Like, not that the phone is a bad thing. I mean, it's got its pros and cons or whatever, but you can really put yourself into a dark hole or a dark place when you just sit there and constantly keep doom scrolling and watching all these short form videos and whatnot. And as somebody that is a fan of short form videos, I mean, on TikTok alone, I found some of my favorite gardening tips, recipes, and even painting tips from other artists. So it wasn't all completely useless, but you just, it's like a constant, like your thumb just keeps scrolling automatically while your brain is just telling you to put it down, put it down, put it down, go do something else, read a book, go outside, go for a walk, do anything but sit here and stare at this phone any longer. And, you know, between that and just regular daily life expectations, you know, dishes, taking care of the kids, getting everybody showered, making sure the laundry's done, walking the dogs, things like that. Like there, I was giving all of my extra time to this phone when I wanted to spend time being creative or reading a book or anything other than just staring blankly into a rectangle. So, I mean, like, that was the whole point of starting this challenge. Like, I wanted to teach myself to reach for something else other than my phone, especially when I was feeling down, because when you're already in a slump and then you grab your phone, you just tend to stay in a slump. But if you go out and go for a walk, you tend to feel better after you're done. So, I wanted to reach for things that would uplift me instead of keep me in a pit of despair. And I think that's the part of this challenge that kind of like really surprised me, is that normally the first week when you start something or the first day you get a new idea, the dopamine is really high and you tend to be more excited about that thing. And then you tend to lose steam throughout the challenge and have a hard time doing it on week 3 versus week 1. And in this case, I was breaking a bad habit and trying to build a new habit, and it was the most challenging week of this whole challenge. And I found that once I got over this first hump, the rest of the month was really quite enjoyable, even though there was some really stressful times in week 2 and week 3, but they were also the most fun, and I found they were really, relaxing at the end of an extremely long, stressful day. I did try to do this every day, and there were some nights that I couldn't. but I did make myself a promise that I would never, it was okay to miss one day, but I could never miss 2 in a row. There's a particular kind of night I keep thinking about, and it was maybe 2 weeks in. I was tired. Actually tired, not just emotionally depleted, and I almost didn't do it. I told myself I'll do 2 tomorrow. I told myself one missed night wouldn't break the ritual. And then I reached for my supplies anyway. Not because I had something to say, not because I felt inspired, just because the lamp was already on and all of the supplies were already there. And it just seemed easier to begin rather than talking myself out of it. Now, did I complete an entire piece that night? No. But I did do a couple layers of watercolor and waited for, paint to dry to do another layer of watercolor so I could work on that piece the next night. So I had already like the base done. I just had to continue working on it, and I found that was kind of like the best strategy that I had, was kind of like there was an idea and already layers of paint on this particular paper. I just had to come back in and work on it some more. And when I was finished with my 30 minutes of painting for that night, something had shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. And I think that's the thing that no one tells you about a creative practice. The nights that it matters most are almost never the nights it feels good. They're the nights you show up anyway. The nights you choose the small thing over nothing. And there were nights in the second week where I was extremely motivated. And while I was waiting for paint to dry on one piece, I would start working on another one. And then I would start sketching another one. Like I just didn't want to stop for the night. And that typically happened on weekend evenings, like after we were done and it was late and the house was finally quiet and I could finally breathe and I just wanted to keep painting, which is what I found very interesting. I am definitely an evening painter. I prefer to paint during the evenings after all of my other work is done. And I think it's kind of just from when I was younger. Like you can't go out and play until your homework's done kind of situation. So finally, during week 2, the evenings became very much enjoyable. Even the dogs enjoyed it. They were like, "Oh, mom's gonna go paint. We're gonna go chill with her. We're gonna get our little treat, and we're gonna just cuddle in bed." And they would just sit in bed with me while I was painting, and they just laid with me as like my emotional support animals and just kind of pushed me on forward, almost like they were rooting for me in their own little doggy way, which was very sweet. There was also this point in between week 2 and week 3 where we had a rough couple special needs days with my kids, and then we had a couple of really bad storms and we lost power for a couple days. So I didn't have my normal root painting routine at night because I didn't have my TV, I didn't have my bedside lamp. I was trying to conserve energy on my phone, so I couldn't film anything, and it got a little bit tedious. And I think throughout the whole month, I possibly missed essentially 8 days total, which technically isn't bad. Realistically, that means I just kind of took weekends off, which is still, you know, 20 days of drawing every night instead of me just going to the studio when I felt inspired. And typically I would get maybe 2 to 3 nights a month where I felt like I was inspired enough to go paint at my desk and whatnot. So all in all, I do feel like the days painted to not painted ratio was very, very good. Some nights I came in excited. Those were the nights where the idea was already kind of forming before I had picked up the brush, where the image was just waiting for me somewhere in the back of my mind, patient and strange, just kind of waiting to be made real, which I think were the most exciting nights and the nights that I didn't want to stop and go to bed because I had to get up early in the morning to get the kids ready for school and whatnot. That dreaded alarm clock, man, that'll really be a buzzkill sometimes during the weeknights, but I think that's why I essentially enjoyed painting on the weekends so much. So between the missed days and whatnot, I know I said it essentially meant that I took the weekends off, but painting on the weekend evenings were actually my favorites. I think I ended up taking Sunday nights were the hardest because those were like the most um, nights that I had to do like a house reset, pack lunches, get things ready for the week, make the grocery order, that kind of stuff. And I think I technically took, yeah, it was essentially Sundays and Thursdays that I didn't paint because I think the hubby had hockey on Thursdays and typically Sundays too, and Sundays were my reset day, so it just kind of worked out like those were my weekends that I took off. But I really enjoyed painting, I think Friday and Saturday nights the most. Those were my favorite days. This piece here that I'm working on screen while I'm just talking about my favorites, I think this is essentially my favorite piece out of the whole month. This is the one that I just really had a blast painting. And I worked on it multiple days. I think it was 4 nights in a row I worked on this. Some days I only had 30 minutes, some days I had a couple hours. So it just kind of worked out to where I was working on this one for about 4 days or so, or 4 nights, because let's be specific, I was painting during the evenings. And yeah, so it was about 4 nights of little goofy work on this, not like 4 8-hour days or anything, but some days I would have 30 minutes, some days I would have an hour, some days I'd have an hour and a half, and some days I would have up to 3 hours. So I think essentially I spent probably maybe 3 to 4 hours on this piece. So it was a 3 to 4 night experience on this one, and this one is definitely my favorite. And I also have this one as its own video, so I will leave a link up in the card there so you can check that out, and in the video description. So by week 3, something had changed in the work itself. The drawings were looser but more intentional in a way, like my hands had remembered something that my brain was still catching up to. The places were getting more stranger, a little bit more specific, less worried about being pretty and more interested in being true in a sense. I also relieved a lot of pressure week 3 and week 4. I did film some, but I just wanted to paint. I didn't want to film much of my week 3 or week 4. And that's what I was chasing. Not beauty, not a portfolio piece, just that feeling of a slight return, like a compass needle setting back towards magnetic north. Like I said, some days I came in excited, and other nights I came in empty. And those nights I would switch mediums from watercolor to gouache to ink to colored pencil. Something about changing the tool changes the expectation. It gives your hands permission to just play, not to perform. I also experimented with some toned paper. I tried black paper, tan paper, and gray paper, which was a lot of fun. And I think I brought a little bit of marker into those toned paper pieces just for some shadow. And it was fun to play with like a white Posca pin for highlights and things like that. So yeah, weeks 3 and 4, I think, were my absolute favorite as far as uh, lessening the pressure and letting myself play and experiment. I do have to say, I think week 4 was probably my favorite week of the challenge because it was like a challenge within a challenge. And it was almost like, okay, this is the last week. Let's see how many tidy paintings that I can actually make. And some of them are really simple. Some of them are took a lot of layers of paint to dry and whatnot. But I had a good time making all of them. And I did find myself grabbing the smallest pieces of papers that I'd cut so I could make more. And I think I ended the challenge with a total of 16 little tiny paintings, which isn't awful. And essentially kind of I worked on each one for 2 nights, which, you know, like I said before, sometimes I would have 30 minutes, sometimes I would have an hour or more. So essentially, I do feel like I accomplished a lot. It's actually quite amazing to look back and see the difference between a daily, or in this case, nightly painting challenge and my regular schedule, like how often I paint when I'm not challenging myself. And for some reason, even though I only had, 30 minutes some nights, and sometimes I think one or two of these drawings I think I spent 15 minutes on, and it's amazing what you can do in that small amount of time in your bed without the pressure of trying to create something really big and extravagant. And it really leads into more painting time when you take the pressure off and have it like in a really low stakes situation. In my situation anyway, when I go to the studio, it's usually for like a 1 to 2 hour session, but getting myself into the studio, it's so high pressure sometimes because like you go in there and you feel like, oh my god, I have to make this so good, and then I have to film all these camera angles and all of this, and I have to make sure I get this shot and that the lighting's good and that I have, enough b-roll and all of that. Whereas the low pressure stakes of painting in bed, you end up creating more because it's low pressure and you technically don't have to film. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, essentially, with a drawing challenge that you're just trying to do for yourself to build a habit. So I found that I think that was like the biggest thing that I learned throughout this whole thing is that really small chunks of time scattered throughout the month versus a small amount of time every night before you go to sleep. There's really a huge difference, and it's definitely made me want to focus more on my art practice. And essentially, I think I'm going to challenge myself to do this again. I don't know if I'm going to film it or anything like that, but I do I do really enjoy drawing in bed, and the whole point, like I wanted to make this a habit, and I did want to get better at my craft, and I feel like drawing every night before I go to bed is a good way to achieve that. Sorry, that was a little rambly and a little tripping over myself because I was thinking and talking at the same time. But listening to that back, there is one other thing that I thought was very oh my gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? enlightening that I found out drawing in bed every night is that the flow state, it comes so easily and it stays for so much longer when I'm not focused on stopping what I'm doing because I've been painting at this camera angle for so long and switching the camera and then trying to get back into that flow state. And I mean, it's a first world problem. It's not that serious, but it does really affect my creative practice when I have to stop being in a flow state that I'm in. And I worked really hard to get in to snap myself out of that, switch the camera, and then try to get back into that flow state. It's definitely a lot easier for me to stay in my flow state while I am drawing in bed, which was very enlightening. And I just really, really enjoyed that aspect of the challenge, I think, the most. So, anyway, this experiment lasted for 30 nights. I got 16 tiny paintings out of the whole experiment. Some of them I love, some of them I'd paint differently now. All of them are honest. I started this because I was tired. Not just physically, though I was that too, but tired in a way that makes you forget what you actually like, what makes you feel like yourself, what you would do with an hour if no one needed anything from you. And somewhere in the middle of the 30 nights of tiny drawings, I remembered. These tiny paintings became a record of more than just paintings. Looking at it now, I can see the nights I was excited and the nights I was just going through the motions. I can see the nights that I switched mediums because it was all I could manage. The nights that I painted in bed, lamp on, paper propped up on my desk, dogs somewhere nearby waiting for a tiny square of color to dry and thinking, there's something in there. I just can't see it yet. And that image, that small, unglamorous, completely ordinary moment is the one that I kept coming back to, because that's where the magic actually lives. Not in the finished pieces, not in the ones that turn out beautifully, but in the returning night after night to the same little piece of paper, to the same quiet desk, to yourself. Painting in bed has become a part of my routine now. It's not a grand artistic practice. It doesn't look impressive, but it's mine. And it reminds me every single night that I don't have to be at full capacity to create something worth keeping. And I think that's what I really want to leave you with. You don't need more time. You don't need more energy. You don't need a better version of yourself to start. You just need a smaller version of the thing you've been putting off. A tiny sketchbook, a bedside lamp, permission to do less than you planned and call it enough. That's a ritual, and that's where you find your way back to yourself. This little box of tiny paintings is full of creatures and foggy little forests. But when I look at it, what I really see is a person who was exhausted and learned 30 days of tiny painting at a time to find her way back to Enchanted. If you have been wanting to draw more or start any kind of creative practice, but you feel too tired, too busy, or too overwhelmed, I hope this gives you permission to start smaller than you think you're supposed to. A tiny sketchbook, a bedside lamp, 30 to 60 minutes, one drawing a night. Invite a little bit of magic to visit you every night, right before you fall asleep.